How confident are you the Mavs can get the dub tonight here against this Toronto Raptors team?
Well, it's going to be tough. They've had pretty good success against Toronto the last couple of years now, but the Raptors, they score a ton of points in transition. They will punish all of your mistakes. And the Mavs have at times these last few games been a little sloppy with the ball. So if Dallas can control the tempo, control the pace, keep this thing in the half court, I feel really good. But if they cannot do that, then it could get real weird real quick.
This is a different kind of team in Toronto, isn't it? Where it's outside of Van Vliet, it's a lot of height and athleticism, and I imagine it's by design. You got to tip your cap to the front office up there.
Yeah, they got a lot of length. Basically, their entire rotation, they only play like 7 or 8 guys most nights, even when they're healthy. And only 2 of them are shorter than like 6'9". Dallas has a very tall starting lineup, and they bring a lot of size off the bench, but the Raptors are going to make the Mavs look small tonight. So that kind of gives you an idea of just how long and how tall these guys are. But all these guys are really skilled, too. Scotty Barnes, very talented with the ball. Pascal Siakam's playing like an MVP. And so not only is it a bunch of guys with 7-foot wingspans, but they're all fast, they're all agile, they can all move. A lot of these guys can shoot. And so it is a very interesting brand of basketball. We think more about like small ball taking over the NBA. But the Raptors are like, well, what if we just rolled out 5 power forwards at the same time? What would happen then? And they've had a lot of good success with it. So they're a very, very different, unique, interesting team to watch.
Yeah, and you said something about them being fast, and I noticed something on Twitter that you had mentioned about them on the fast break. How will the Mavericks look in transition and with the Raptors and their dominance with the fast break points?
Yeah, so more than 22% of their total points this season, Toronto, have come on the fast break. And only one other team has scored at least 17% of their points on the fast break. And so, Toronto runs more and more effectively than just about anybody else. And it makes sense. All these guys are like 6'10", right? So if they pick off a pass, it takes them like 3 steps to get from one end of the floor to the other. And so, they'll push it off makes too. That's the thing. You have to get up and down the floor. You got to be willing to run with these guys. And, against Atlanta a couple games ago, the Raptors duked Trae Young, who's a pretty good, player when it comes to ball security. They forced him into 10 turnovers. And so they will throw all sorts of length, all sorts of junk defenses and zones against you. They'll take chances in the passing lanes. And so if you do make a mistake, you have to get back. But also, if you score, you have to get back in defense. You do not want this thing to become a track meet. You have to make this like a playoff-style, real slow, knockdown, drag-out, grind-it-out kind of game.
Bobby, you mentioned zone defense talking about Toronto. We saw the Mavs throw a little zone the other night in their game. Is this something that they're kind of tinkering with, or is this something that the kids said, hey, we got to do something differently than what we've doing with some previous looks we've given people?
Yeah, I thought J-Kid was pretty funny because he said, they went to zone because it's not like they could have any success with man-on-man. So, they might as well just try something. And it worked against Utah surprisingly well. I thought the Jazz, they got a bunch of shooters on that team. In the starting lineup and coming off the bench. Now, Toronto, not as good at executing in the half court, and certainly, there's going to be some weird size mismatches. Like Spencer Dinwiddie, if Fred VanVleet is out of the game, Spencer Dinwiddie is going to have to be guarding a guy that's like 4 or 5 inches taller than him. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see the Mavs go to that zone a little more often tonight. It definitely helps to stall the offense. Utah was slicing and dicing the Mavs up with a combination of just straight-up dribble penetration, but then also off-ball cutting, things like that. And whenever you play a zone, it really limits a lot of that stuff. You have to kind of shoot over it. And the Raptors do have a fair amount of shooting. Van Vliet, Gary Trent Jr. in particular can shoot it, but a lot of these guys would rather put their back to the basket or get all the way to the rim. And so if the tempo is starting to kind of get away from the Mavs, or if they're facing some wonky matchups, it would not surprise me at all to see more 2-3 because, it could be the one thing that really slows down the Raptors offense more than anything else.
Bobby, KarillaMavs.com with us here in the GBag Nation on 105.3 The Fan. Bobby, how frustrated are you with JaVale McGee to this point in the season? Because I am quite irritated.
Yeah, some of those minutes have been pretty rough. Not going to lie. I think even JaVale would admit that, and Jason Kidd kind of tacitly admits that. because at times whenever JaVale is struggling, he's pretty quick to yank him, sometimes waiting only like 2 or 3 minutes to pull him out. And, when the Mavs signed him this summer, it was evident from day one, like they signed him to be the starting center. And so, I still think it's so early in the season to where you can't do anything rash, like just bench a guy or completely change your starting lineup or anything. I think you got to give him a little more time to try and kind of find his bearings because, you never know. It could click. It took the Mavs a while last year to find the correct starting lineup, and, guys that were starting ended up coming off the bench. Guys that were coming off the bench, like Jalen Brunson, ended up starting. And so, it took a little while for everything to fall into place. And it could click eventually for JaVale, or maybe not. I think the one factor that's going to determine how this goes more than anything is, can the Mavs defend well whenever he's on the floor? He's kind of this classic rim protector, shot blocker type. And so to accentuate his strengths, they're playing more drop coverage where he's kind of sagging way back, below the screen, standing as close to the rim as possible. But when you do that, you can cede a lot of room in the mid-range and on the perimeter for the guards to kind of pull up from 18 feet or 25 feet, whatever. And if those shots keep falling, and if the Mavs keep getting off to slow defensive starts, then you are going to have to make a change at some point. But I think right now, smash the panic button or wave the white flag or whatever, I just think it's a little too premature, but certainly over the next couple weeks, we'll learn a little more about how this thing is going to go.
Well, and it opened up an opportunity for your guy, Dwight Powell. Now, another thing I wanted to ask you
Love Dwight Powell. I love Dwight Powell.
I know
Not as much
do.
as Dinwiddie does.
That's true. Dinwiddie had a lot of high praise. But speaking of Powell and Christian Wood, and the Mavericks, one of their offseason priorities was the rebounding. And one thing that was very frustrating, specifically in the first half against Utah, was the second and third offensive opportunities for the Jazz. It just seemed like the Mavericks were struggling to box out and get some rebounds. Overall, your assessment from the first, small sample size, but the Mavericks and their rebounding so far earlier this year.
Well, through the OKC game, which I think was the 5th game of the year or 6th game of the year, they were the number 1 team in the NBA in terms of defensive rebounding rate. So the percentage of available rebounds that they grabbed, they were number 1. But against Orlando, who plays a giant lineup similar to Toronto, and like you said in the first half, against the Jazz, they did really struggle. And I think the one kind of difference between the Magic game and the Jazz game is that for the Jazz, it was Jared Vanderbilt getting a lot of these rebounds, or guards, perimeter players scooping up a lot of these second chances, which, indicates to me that either you're switching and guys aren't able to box out because you're kind of rotating, or sometimes it is harder to rebound in the zone because you're defending a spot, not a man. Or it's just the guards for the Mavs, it's Luka, Dinwiddie, Bullock, those guys, they have to do better boxing out. You don't want perimeter players, like think back to the Warriors series. Andrew Wiggins was almost as effective on the offensive glass as Kevon Looney was. And so if the center's doing a really good job boxing out, somebody else has to get the rebound. And that just wasn't the case often enough against Utah. But, they cleaned it up. And in the first 5 or 6 games, they were really good. Now, tonight will be another very big test because the Raptors are so giant. This is a really freaking big team. And so every single player, no matter whether you're 7 feet or 6 feet, you're going to have to box out. You're going to have to work hard for every rebound because second chances lead to easy shots, lead to a lot more points, and turn a would-be win into potentially a loss.
It's Bobby Karalla, Mavs.com, with us here in the GBag Nation. Now, are we seeing more Luka post-ups, and what type of advantages does that bring to the Mavs?
Yeah, I thought this guy, Grant Afseth, had a really good article today at SI, Fish's SI site, Mavs SI site, talking about Luka's post-ups. And one thing Luka said in that article is that, yes, he is posting up more, but one advantage of that is not only is he really good at posting up, and it is a way to take advantage of mismatches, whenever littles are defending him, but also in those instances, he's not having to bring the ball up the floor. He's not having to drive the lane, get slapped, get hip checked, take a beating, go to the basket. He can just catch it comfortably one-on-one and go to work, And it's a lot easier to, I want to pause it. It's not necessarily easy to pass out of the post if you're not super skilled. But for a guy as big as Luka, with his vision, whenever you're posting up, if you do get double-teamed, it's super easy to identify where that double is coming from, and it's very easy to make reads out of the post. And so, it doesn't let Luka take the possession off necessarily, but it does make his job a little easier. And as everybody is concerned with usage, every time Luka has to take a dribble, he's working. And so if someone else can bring the ball up the floor, if somebody else can initiate the offense, if someone else can kind of let everything happen and deliver an entry pass into Luka, and all he needs to do is go dribble, turn, shoot, well, then that is way easier than him getting full court pressed, having to deal with the double team, pass, run, go get it back, set another rescreen, and then go to work that way. So, a dual purpose. Takes advantage of mismatches, but also helps Luka, save a little bit of energy throughout games. And if you do that enough times throughout the game, then when the fourth quarter comes around, you're not going to be exhausted. You're only going to be just as tired as everybody else.
Bobby, I'm having a blast watching Luka put up these kind of numbers, and I don't mind the usage. It's just amazing to watch him work so much, But I do wonder, what's the Luka stat line on a championship roster with a better supporting cast?
Man, that is interesting because he can score 30 or 40 whenever he wants, and so it's like, do you do that? Or is his stat line like 20 points and like 12 assists, kind of like old school Magic Johnson kind of play? I really have no idea. I think ultimately, a lot of fans would say that the gap between the Mavs as they sit right now and the championship version of the Mavs, whenever that is that true second guy, right? But no one knows what that second guy is. Is he a big? Is he another guard? Is he like a big-time perimeter defender that can also handle the ball? Is it like an all-time great shooter? Like, no one really knows who that guy is. And so until they find that guy, I'm not sure I could answer that question. But, the way he's playing right now, with as dominant as he's been, and for as many mistakes as the Mavs have made throughout games, in all three of their losses, they could have won it at the buzzer. And so it's not like, there's not much separating them from being 4-3 versus like 7-0, for example.
Yeah.
So they're really close to being extremely good. It just comes down to trying to minimize your mistakes throughout the game, and that goes especially for the free throw line. I mean, I don't even want to talk about that. It's been pretty ugly at times, but, you got to just take care of the details. But, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I don't know what his stat line looks like when they win the title, but hopefully I'll be able to answer that question in like 6 months.
Yeah, and he might be versatile and different enough that he could get that done in many different ways. Okay, so in New York, the Knicks are not off to a great start, but what do you think so far, early returns on not having Jalen Brunson on this team and how that helps or hurts things for the Mavericks?
Oh, he's been great for them, hasn't he? He's just been awesome. I think without him, a lot more pressure is on Spencer Dinwiddie whenever Luka is out of the game, to not only continue scoring, but also do like all of the facilitating. And it's tough to juggle both of those things because throughout most of his career, and I'm not saying that Spencer can't facilitate or whatever, but throughout most of his career, he's been asked to score more than he's been asked to like set the table for other guys. And you can kind of see, especially in the first few games, you could see the gears turning. Like, should I look for my own shot? Or should I get Tim a shot? Should I get Christian Wood a shot? Should I find Maxey? Whatever. You could kind of see him weighing his options. And so, I've always been of the opinion that you can never have enough playmaking, you can never have enough three-point shooting, and you can never have enough switchable defenders. And I think the Mavs have a fair amount of shooting. I think they got a fair amount of wings, guys that can cover multiple positions. But they still need just another guy that can handle the ball, another guy that can break down his defender, another guy that could get to the basket, because Luka and Dinwiddie are living in the lane right now. But God forbid something happens to one of those guys, or they get a night off, or they get in foul trouble, all of a sudden things could get a little rocky. And so, I think they're doing pretty well scoring at a high clip without Brunson, but, playing with only two of these guys, you're not leaving yourself a lot of margin for error if something bad happens to one or to, heck, even both of them throughout 82 games.
Bobby, we in the radio business here in the media, whatever, we talk about this quite a bit about, locker room chemistry or how the team is looking or relationships between the coaches and the players. What is your assessment of what you've seen so far with Christian Wood and then Jason Kidd? Is it something that we should keep an eye on, or is this going to take care of itself with just more time?
That's a good question. It'll probably take care of itself. I think in today's day and age, with as active as everybody is on social media, I feel like it'd be pretty obvious if C. Wood was going through it. You know, he'd be making cryptic posts, or in interviews he'd be dropping quotes, and none of that stuff has really happened. And outside of the after the game, whenever the Mavs blew that lead to the Thunder, J. Kidd kind of said like, "Well, I left Wood in the game this time. Are you happy now?"
Sure.
Which I don't think that was as much a shot as Wood as much as it was just like saying like, "I'm trying everything," and no one is stepping up. I think it's been pretty decent so far. What the big test will be, I guess. Let's say Wood continues averaging 15 to 20 points a game. He was awesome in the second half against Utah on Wednesday night. But for a couple games before that, he was kind of struggling. But if he is consistently very good and, is consistently not closing games, whether the Mavs are winning or losing, then things could get a little weird. But, right now, I think it's so early in the year. It's probably too early for a player or a coach to be like, this is not working. Because you're trying to kind of figure everything out, not just with Wood, but also with everybody else too. And now I think the one thing that the Mavs have found is that Wood and Maxey together are very good because they can kind of complement each other at both ends of the floor. And so it wouldn't surprise me to see those guys play more together, which works for Wood because if Maxey's out there, you're not really playing through Maxey in the pick and roll. You're playing through Wood in the pick and roll, which leads to a lot more touches, a lot more scoring opportunities. And so I think everyone will be happy that way. And Maxey can help kind of minimize or conceal any defensive shortcomings on the other end that Wood may have. And so I think that's a really good duo. And, we'll see. I think if the points and production stays there and if the defensive engagement stays there, then the minutes will get higher. If not, then maybe not. I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see.